There's the conspiracy theories, oh, it's the space lasers. Oh, they're clearing the land so Gavin Newsom can build his smart cities. They're clearing the land so they can seize it for the Olympics. These people have no concept of how anything actually works. The only concepts they have are the way they think things work. And then, so you have the conspiracy theories, and then you have the disinformation, and it's a little bit different. It's very similar, but it has a more political edge to it. So you have the idea that the DEI firefighters were just standing around because they didn't know what to do. I'll tell you, I've never seen people work harder and risk their lives more readily than the firefighters who were trying to put these fires out.
Feeling lost?
Then you're in the right place.
I'm Amanda Knox.
And I'm Christopher Robinson.
And this is Labyrinth.
QAnon, Gavin Newsom's smart cities, and Jewish space lasers. When it comes to conspiracy theories, Mike Rothschild has seen it all. Once called Little Chicken Neck by Alex Jones, he has become an expert on fringe beliefs, authoring the first complete book on the QAnon conspiracy movement and a written testimony to the January 6th Select Committee on the role of the movement in the Capitol attack. However, after losing his home in the LA fires, Rothschild found himself in the heart of conspiracy attacks he spent his life studying. Rothschild guides us through a labyrinth of unsubstantiated beliefs and helps us understand why humans always need a villain.
I am a journalist, and I cover conspiracy theories and disinformation, hoaxes, scams, myths, basically anything that your aunt forwards you from Facebook without having read, I've probably written about.
Okay, I feel like that's the deepest rabbit hole that you could go down.
These days, yes, it is deep and endless.
Okay, well, quickly, what got you into that?
It's a long story. So I started listening to the old Art Bell radio show, Coast to Coast AM, when I was in college. And this was, late night, truckers and insomniacs and people passing out pamphlets outside shopping centers, and it was UFOs and Bigfoot and crop circles. It was still in that time when conspiracy theories were still really on the fringe. This wasn't stuff that people talked about in mainstream culture. Nobody I knew believed in it. But it was really fascinating to me, and it was really interesting for me to hear these stories and hear people talk about these things as if they were real and as if they really believed that these things were real. And I really thought to myself, what causes someone to think they've been taken by a UFO, or that they finally have cracked the case of the JFK assassination? And again, this was the late 90s. This was the time of the X-Files and the Mel Gibson conspiracy theory movie. This stuff was still kind of weirdos and people you just didn't want in your life. And then it started to just get more and more mainstream, and people started accepting more of it, started spreading more of it. The internet made it a lot easier to share these things and create these things. Then, of course, we had our first conspiracy theorist president, and now here we are, and everybody seems to know somebody who believes in at least one of these things and probably a lot of these things.
Right. It's interesting that you bring up how fringe it was, and yet then the X-Files came around and it suddenly became really popular to even just enjoy, to imagine that maybe there are aliens and the government is covering it up. And actually, my husband had an uncle who was big into conspiracies in the same way that it seemed harmless, right? It seemed like, it's just people talking on the radio or talking on the internet about some fun, fantasy. They're going out a good example of this is a group of people would go out camping together in the hopes that they would see Bigfoot. But really, it's just a bunch of people drinking beer out in the woods and having a good time. What's the harm in that? And then we go into finding what is the harm in that. And do you think that there is a difference between those who believe in it because it's fun to believe in it and there's a social community, and is there a difference between those people and the people who really, really believe it and are hell-bent on revealing the truth and uncovering the corrupt powers that be?
Yeah, there are a lot of people who believe these things because of the storytelling aspect, because of the fun aspect of it, because, it's fun to imagine that there are powerful forces at work and deep secrets being held, and that you are the one who has figured them out. You know what's going on, and the rest of us are asleep, and you get to hold that truth over us. And for most people, it never really goes any farther than that. It is just these things that you believe in, but you go about your life and you work and you raise your kids and whatever. But for a few people, you become so obsessed with these ideas that you are being controlled, that there are vast dark forces allying against you and keeping you down. So much of this is based in personal grievance. It's an abdication of personal responsibility for a lot of people. It's my business failed, not because I'm not very good at business, but because the Jews, ensured that I wouldn't be competition to them. My marriage failed because the government is spying on me and ruining all of my investments. That's actually somebody who I interviewed for my book on QAnon. Their long-term friendship disintegrated because this guy believed that the government was stealing his investment advice. I mean, his investment advice wasn't very good, but it becomes sort of a personal crusade. And for some of those people, it really does take over every aspect of how they see the world, how they take in information, and ultimately how they interact with other people.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think it's tempting to think that those of us who have never been caught up in a conspiracy theory and had it be a personal crusade, I think it's tempting to think, oh, this is clearly just a symptom of mental illness. But my impression is that it's way more complicated than that. And, I've interviewed people before who have either been caught up in a conspiracy theory, and there were certain aspects of their life that led them to have a cognitive opening or allowed them to receive this information because they were in a suggestible state of mind. Like maybe they broke up with their longtime husband, or like something happened in their life that led them to having a moment where they were like, oh, I can now reframe the world with this new understanding. But I feel like that is not the same thing as mental illness. That is something that we all experience because at some point in our lives, something unexpected happens. And, like I'm even just thinking of how when I first found out that my roommate was murdered, it was completely out of the blue, out of nowhere. And all of a sudden I started wondering, like, oh my God, are these people that I've been hanging out around, is any one of them like a serial killer psychopath? Like it's that sort of shift in your ability to re-perceive reality through this like worst possible light lens because there is some kind of like shocking thing that happens. And that is not a mental illness thing. That is just a human thing. Yeah. Have you thought about anything like that?
Oh, absolutely. I think about it all the time. There are certainly people who are caught up in these movements who are struggling with mental illness. Absolutely. But for most people, that's not it. And I think writing all of these people off as, oh, they're just crazy, that allows you to ignore the actual problems going on. And one of the things I've really realized in writing about all of this stuff and talking to these people and really immersing myself in these worlds is that conspiracism serves as an explanation. It really offers up a reason why things are the way they are. And it offers you somebody to blame. It offers you a reason why this thing happened to you. If you are walking down the street and an air conditioner falls on your head and crushes you, you don't want to believe that you were just a victim of really, really bad luck. You want to believe that somebody pushed that air conditioner on you because you needed to be gotten rid of. You were in the way. You knew too much and you were a problem. So for a lot of people who become radicalized very quickly by conspiracism, by cults or anything like that, these things come at them when they are in a really vulnerable place to receive them. For most people, we're going to see a QAnon video or something. We're going to go, that's the dumbest thing I've ever seen. Delete. But if you are in the wrong state of mind and this thing hits you at the right time, in the right way, and finds you in a place where you are vulnerable, it can easily pull you in. And then it starts to really offer sort of appealing and easy answers that don't require a lot of thought and don't require you to really criticize some of the choices you've made in your own life. And I think we saw this especially during lockdown. We were all suddenly, walled off, alone, isolated. A lot of people lost their jobs. A lot of people lost their social circles. And we went looking for reasons why this happened. And we went looking for who did it to us. And people started finding conspiracy theories. They started finding these videos that told them, well, it's all a big plot. You know who's involved. This is what they're trying to do. It's all been planned. If you see the right video and it's the middle of the night and you've been up all night and you're just angry and looking for some reason why this happened, and suddenly here's this neato 20-minute video full of graphics and a ominous narrator, you could easily be pulled in before you've even realized what's happened to you.
So you've written a book, Jewish Space Lasers, The Rothschilds and 200 Years of Conspiracy Theories.
Yes.
I would argue that you are someone who is a self-made expert on this topic.
Well, yeah.
Why Jewish space lasers?
So I have the last name Rothschild, and I am not related to the very famous banking Rothschilds.
The Rothschilds are a wealthy and noble Ashkenazi Jewish family, originally from Frankfurt. They rose to prominence under Mayor Amschel Rothschild, who established his banking business in the 1760s. Their assets were held in financial instruments, circulating through the world as stocks, bonds, and debts. In the 19th century, the Rothschilds possessed the largest private fortune in the world.
If I were, I would not be living at my mother-in-law's house while trying to figure out what we were going to do after we, lost our own home in the Eaton fire.
Convenience, I'd say.
Well, yeah, this is all a very elaborate deception. Oh, I'm sure there is somebody who is pouring through things I've written and pictures I've taken going, oh, no, this is all proof that he's faking it. He's just faking it for the insurance money. It's just incredibly elaborate plot. But, I've been writing about conspiracy theories for a long time, and having this last name of this family about whom there have been so many conspiracy theories. And when I started writing about this stuff, I would get these comments like, oh, a Rothschild writing about conspiracy theories, how stupid do they think we are? Kind of stupid. I grew up in the Chicago suburbs in a split level house. We didn't have, ancient family money, but why this family? And what does it say about how we perceive wealth, how we perceive power, how we perceive Judaism, that we continue to blame everything that goes wrong on either this one particular Jewish family, the Rothschilds, or sort of the next iteration of the wealthy Jewish puppet master, which is George Soros?
If you've heard of George Soros, it's probably because a family member or friend is convinced he's behind one or more global catastrophes. The American investor and philanthropist, whose net worth was $6.7 billion as of October 2023, has been described as the perfect code word for anti-Semitic conspiracy theories.
And I start diving into these conspiracy theories, and I found almost an alternate history of American paranoia going all the way back to the mid-1800s, and conspiracy theories about what the Union was really doing in the Civil War or who really started World War I. The history of America is really entwined with paranoia and conspiracism, and so much of it is entwined with paranoia about Jews in general, and then in particular the Rothschild banking family.
Wild. Why? So this has actually been something that I have never understood. Why this fixation on the Jews? Why?
Mm-hmm.
I don't understand. I'm so far away from all of that that I just don't get it.
We always veer back to the Jews. So, right after 9/11, we suddenly become, Islamophobia is everywhere, but then it pivots back to the Jews. Or right at the beginning of COVID, this Asian American hate breaks out, and then it pivots back to the Jews. So essentially, the relationship between Jews and money is a very historical one, going back to the Middle Ages, where there were essentially canon laws against the lending of money at interest. It was considered a mortal sin, basically, to make money out of non-money. basically. But the churches and the rulers and the royal families, they needed money. They needed to build their giant castles. They needed to raise their armies. So they turned to communities who were allowed to lend money at interest, and those were almost always Jewish communities. And there was a sense that the Jews were hoarding their wealth. They were keeping it in and among themselves. They had these strange customs. They had a strange language, strange dietary restrictions. They were outsiders. They were other. But at the same time, we need them. We need their money. We can't build our giant churches if we don't have that money. So it became this very paradoxical love-hate relationship. And that's never entirely gone away, even as some of those prohibitions against usury, against the idea of lending money and interest, started to fall away. And you'd start to see more Christian people starting banks and lending money and interest, and eventually amassing great fortunes and starting these huge companies. The idea that all Jews are wealthy, all Jews are powerful, and all Jews are sort of plotting in secret to keep that money and control the rest of us with it, that never entirely went away, even if historical trends really changed.
Gosh, that is just so interesting to me that like something so old and also not super relevant now should have like any sort of significance.
Yeah, it's all sort of old hat. I mean, the idea that Jews are overrepresented in certain fields, or Jews control all the banks. I mean, if you look at the history of the major banking firms in America, yes, some of them have Jewish founders, but because Judaism was always placed an emphasis on literacy, on charity, many more of them were started by big American families. And if you look at the Rothschilds in particular, the Rothschilds have no real presence in the United States. They didn't come over here during the Great Diaspora. Part of it was the Rothschilds didn't really understand the way American laws worked. They had their comfortable position. They could just lend money to prime ministers or kings or princes. And that style of sort of family banking was how they really prospered. But that wasn't what people were doing even into the 1800s. And the Rothschilds just didn't keep up with it. So the idea that the Rothschilds own all the federal banks, they started the Federal Reserve, we know for a fact that that's not true. But we have been blaming our problems on wealthy Jews for so long that at this point it's just shorthand. It's just easier to do it. You don't have to reinvent the wheel when you claim that, well, you know, the Rothschilds started the forest fire in California, or the Rothschilds started COVID-19. You already have this kind of pre-planted corpus of literature that is going to go along with all of these ridiculous things that you're saying. And a lot of conspiracy theorists really are just lazy and don't want to do a lot of the work.
You know, that's really an interesting point. One of the things that I was most struck by when I was reading about your book is, on the one hand, there is all of this manpower and energy that goes into wild, idle speculation, but also how useless it ultimately is. And I wonder if you can talk to me a little bit about how to distinguish between what is useful speculation and what is not useful speculation.
That's a really interesting question, a really interesting way to put it. I think for most of us, the kind of speculation that can lead to conspiracism is very natural. You know, just having myself going through the Eaton fire and losing my home. You want to be angry. You want to be able to say that person did it. It was their fault. And why it happened. Why me? Why not my neighbor 2 doors down? Why not my neighbor right behind me? Why did it happen to me? And you start to come up with theories about, well, it was targeted. Our neighborhood needed to be gotten rid of for some reason. I've actually seen people say that, Altadena burned down because they needed the land for the Olympics. I mean, it's ridiculous, but it is a way of trying to make sense out of things that inherently don't make any sense. And I think where it starts to become useless is when you start to believe that everything needs to have an explanation and nothing happens at random. Nothing is a coincidence. Nothing is just bad luck. Everything's a plot. Everything's a scheme. Everything has somebody controlling it. That's when you start to divorce yourself from real life and start to kind of absolve yourself of any potentially bad choices that you made. or of just the randomness of modern life and how sometimes you just have something bad happen. There's nothing you could have done about it. That's when I think it starts to become really not just useless, but actively harmful. It really keeps you from engaging with the world as it is. But I think that kind of speculation and the kind of yearning for answers and asking questions and trying to dig deeper, I think that can be extremely useful. It's just that so many people are asking the wrong questions and digging into the wrong places.
You brought up the Eaton fire and how, and in fact, I think we should talk about that because this is a random tragedy that impacted you personally, but now it's sort of like the conspiracy theorists have descended upon this particular tragedy to import their conspiracy on it. So I want to know from you, first of all, what was your experience of the fires and how the Jews are responsible?
Yeah, it always comes back to that. It's surreal. You know, so this started January 7th, that when we started to have the Santa Ana winds in Los Angeles. And we have them every year. They're just the winds that blow through the mountains. They've been getting stronger over the last few decades, but this time it was 80 miles an hour, 90 miles an hour. And our house is kind of shaking and our roof tiles are flying off. And we're thinking, okay, this is annoying. This is going to, cost us some money, but whatever, we'll be fine. And the Palisades fire had already broken out. And we're seeing the stories of people evacuating. We're going, okay, that's not anywhere near us. So about 6 o'clock that night, I'm coming home with our kids and we can see in the distance, there's a glow. And we're thinking that's a fire nearby. But it was still fairly far away. It was several miles away. The Eaton Canyon, where the fire broke out, it's near us, but it's not that near us. And fire doesn't move that quickly. So we thought, okay, the worst thing that might happen is we lose power. So a couple of hours later, things are getting worse. It's very, very windy. We can start to see the fire creeping across the mountains. And from our porch, I could turn left and the mountains are right there. It's one of the things I love about living in Altadena so much. Just the mountains and nature are right there. It's pretty rare for LA. Where we lived was at least a mile south of the street that was considered the dividing line for fire danger. So this is maybe about 9:30 or 10. It's really windy. It's really smoky out. And we think, okay, let's just grab some stuff. Let's put some stuff in our two cars just in case we need to go. Not even because our house is in danger, but because there might need to be first responder access. The smoke really more than anything is the thing that we're concerned about the most. So we get some priceless stuff off the walls. We pack some sort of random assortment of things that we didn't put a ton of thought into. We started hearing from friends that the wind has shifted the other way, that we're going to be fine. We're really not even close to it. We think, okay, we're going to get some sleep and we're going to see how things look in the morning. 3:25 a.m., our phones start blaring. And it is not evacuation warning. It is get out now. I mean, by this point, our power has gone out. It's really cold in our house. We're freaking out. Our kids are freaking out. We grab a few random things. I spend 2 or 3 minutes deciding which t-shirt I'm going to wear. I don't have any idea why. I thought that this was important. Everybody else left in pajamas. I just for some reason put a lot of thought into what I was going to evacuate in. I have no idea why.
I mean, trauma responses are very strange. So
trauma responses are the weirdest thing. The stories that we're hearing from friends about the stuff that they grabbed and didn't grab. I mean, friends who didn't grab their pictures, but the husband grabbed the strapless bra that the wife hasn't worn in 10 years. I mean, you're just not thinking about it. So we are out the door in 10 minutes and we pull out. We can't see any fire, but it is pitch black. All the street lights are out. The power's out. It is smoky like the end of a cigarette. And we just drive. And we drove to our mother-in-law's house. She didn't have power, but the fires were nowhere near her. We got a couple of hours of sleep, then we get another warning. This is an evacuation warning, but we misinterpreted it as another go now command, basically. And we went, because we're freaked out and we're exhausted, we headed to the church where we actually got married, and we spent most of Wednesday there. And that's where we found out from neighbors who'd snuck up to our neighborhood that our house had burned down. And
oh my God.
yeah, and we had tried to get up there actually a couple of times, and everything's blocked off. There's fire engines going every which way. Firefighters are everywhere. We see houses burning, but we can't get near ours. But we had a neighbor who took a picture of our street, of our block, and there's the two houses on either side of us. Each house is on fire. Ours is just gone. It's just not there. And then our neighbor who did lose their house texted us a picture of their home burning, which they saw on the local news. So we knew by Wednesday night that our house was gone, and we just didn't have anywhere to go. We had friends who offered where to take us, but it's 2 kids, it's 2 big dogs, it's a lot of stuff. And we did finally end up crashing for a couple of nights with the parents of a friend of ours who lives in Claremont, California, which is about an hour east of LA. And that's where we kind of started to recombobulate. We started making some of the insurance calls and just kind of trying to figure out what the hell do we do next.
Right. So your world is ending.
Yeah.
And that is insane. I'm so sorry you went through that.
Thank you.
Is there anything that you lost that you wish you had remembered in that flurry of fleeing that you wish that you had taken with you?
You spend a lot of time remembering things that you didn't grab. And it's something as simple as a t-shirt from the diner that I like to go to in college. It's as irreplaceable as our younger kiddos' artwork that we were going to take pictures of, but we just never got around to it. It's the Legos that I had from when I was a kid. It's the foul ball that my son caught at a Dodger game. But we actually had more than other friends of ours. We were able to grab our documents. We were able to grab some pictures. We were able to grab the signed photo frame from our wedding with a lot of signatures of people who are no longer with us. Those are things that can never, ever be replaced. And we have friends who had basically nothing, who grabbed maybe 1 box of documents or grabbed the wrong things. We have friends of ours who we actually ran into their kids while we were headed up north. We went up to the central coast of California for the next couple of weeks. When we were driving up, we stopped at a rest stop. We actually saw some kids that we knew, and their son, who's about our son's age, was like, "Yeah, we were up in Mammoth at the time. Our neighbor broke in and grabbed our social security cards and our cats." I mean, it's just people who they have lost everything. And it hits you at really strange times and in really strange ways. And you remember things that you just go, yeah, wow, I that's gone. We'll never see that again. And then there's other things that you go, I don't know. I have no idea why I have this. I will never use this. You find the humor in other people remembering the most random crap that they grabbed. And you very quickly develop a kind of shorthand and a shared language with the other people who've gone through this, where you don't even have to ask, did you lose your house? It's, where are you staying? What did you grab? It's a language that only a select few people will be able to speak. And everyone else, it's just sort of, you can tell the story, but if you haven't experienced it, if you haven't seen the burned out wrecks of houses and businesses and schools, you can't understand it all the way. And I hope people don't have to ever understand it.
Right. When you were fleeing, did any part of you think this is going to be the subject of a conspiracy theory?
I just know how these people think. And I know that every single thing that happens is going to be run through the strainer of politicization, of conspiracism, of pick a side, who really did it, whose fault is it really? Then there's going to be the social media stuff that goes viral. Then there's going to be the hoaxes. Then there's going to be the scams. I kind of knew immediately that there would be a lot of conspiracy theories about this, particularly because it's Los Angeles. And so much of the conspiracy theory community thinks that Los Angeles is all Hollywood, all satanic pedophiles having their ceremonies and trafficking their children in the tunnels under the Getty Museum. And of course, with the Palisades fire, you really did see, the Hollywood stars losing their homes. And you're going to see people going, oh, they deserve it. They hate Trump. They're all these liberals. And okay, fine, whatever. But the people in Altadena, where I live, this is not a Hollywood community. This is not palatial second homes. This is a very middle-class community. This is one of the last places in LA where people could actually afford to buy a home. So you had a lot of artists. You had a lot of, below-the-line entertainment industry people who, of course, have barely worked in the last 3 years because of COVID and then the strikes. Altadena is also really distinguished because it was a redlined community. So it was a community where Black families could buy homes in the 40s and 50s. Pasadena was segregated into the early 70s. So this was a place where Black families could build generational wealth. And I know quite a few people who their homes were where they grew up, where maybe their parents grew up, and now they're all gone. And these are very different communities, but very united communities all coming together to figure out how to make this special place special again and keep out the developers and the predatory lenders and the people who are just going to buy up the lots and leave them standing or turn them into gated communities. And Altadena really has come together very quickly to preserve what made this place so special and so meaningful. And it's a world away from the kind of stereotypical Southern California, everyone's a zillionaire, everyone's a liberal elite. That existence just wasn't life in Altadena.
And so how then does Altadena get roped into this conspiracy? What is the conspiracy theory about these fires?
There's a lot of different ones. And there's the conspiracy theories, it's the space lasers. Oh, they're clearing the land so Gavin Newsom can build his smart cities. They're clearing the land so they can seize it for the Olympics.
With space lasers.
Right. To individually pinpoint each house to be destroyed. Oh, that's why certain houses are still standing. That's why the trees didn't burn down. Do your research. I'm like, well, trees didn't burn down because they're full of water. They got charred.
But don't they know that about burning green wood? Like you have to let the wood age in order to
these
burn.
People have no concept of how anything actually works. The only concepts they have are the way they think things work. And then, so you have the conspiracy theories, and then you have the disinformation, and it's a little bit different. It's very similar, but it has a more political edge to it. So you have the idea that the DEI firefighters were just standing around because they didn't know what to do. I'll tell you, I've never seen people work harder and risk their lives more readily than the firefighters who were trying to put these fires out. That's ridiculous that the firefighters are just diversity hires and just standing around. Or that Gavin Newsom was stealing all the water to protect some rare endangered fish. And that, all the water was there and they just needed to turn on the giant spigot and truck it south. I mean, this is stuff that the president is saying and has no relationship to reality, and is coloring people's perception of how these fires were fought and how people are dealing with it and how vulnerable we have become to fires because of the extreme swings in our climate. It's turning a terrible situation into a situation that almost can't even be talked about because there is so much nonsense and misinformation about it. You can absolutely have issues with how the response to the fires have been, but when you're really looking for a villain to blame this on and you don't understand how anything works, conspiracy theories and disinformation make a great security blanket to wrap yourself up in.
The thing that I find really surprising is that conversations about climate change and about how, again, we get back to that idea of what is useful speculation and what is not useful speculation. So you can say, even just thinking about the fires, I've heard people talking about how, just in general, what is the history of how water is dispersed throughout, California, what kind of crops are being, raised and is there problems with that? Are we also attempting to like make uninhabitable places habitable simply because they happen to be in the vicinity of a lot of, potential wealth? Like there's all of these like interesting questions that are potentially worth speculating about because they could like after you add them all up sort of give some kind of idea about how do we avoid this in the future. And then on the other side of it is space lasers. And like I know that like space lasers sound a lot funner and simpler than all of those sort of economic and social and physical world explanations. But getting a space laser into space without anybody noticing.
Right. And then immediately be uncovered by sleuths on the internet, which is how it works for every conspiracy theory. Yeah, the space lasers and the DEI nonsense, all of that keeps you from asking the questions that actually should be asked about something like the Eaton fire. The questions that the people who are living through it are asking. Were the power lines de-energized in time? Should the power lines be underground? We had really wet winters the last couple of years, and then it was a really dry winter. Should more brush have been removed? Should we be building in some of these places? How do we get water to a desert? LA is a desert. It doesn't naturally have water. They made a movie about it called Chinatown. It's really good. These are questions we've been struggling with for a long time. What plants should we be planting? What crops should we be growing? What should our relationship with nature be in Southern California? How are our summers getting hotter? How are our winters getting wetter? Why were the winds so high that one day? What relationship did it have to the, brutal cold and snow on the East Coast at the same time? Should we have seen this coming? Did people predict it? Those are the questions that we really need to be answering for the next rebuild, for how to make our homes more fireproof, for should we be here in the first place? Conspiracy theories don't deal with any of that stuff.
But why? Because like you can really sink your teeth into that.
Because they're complicated.
But like my point is that like some conspiracy theories are really complicated. But like the only difference that I can see is that there is like an evil bad guy on the end of it, and then in another one there's not an evil bad guy. It's just human beings being, making mistakes or making decisions, not knowing what the consequences of those decisions are going to be. Is it that simple that like a conspiracy theory requires a bad guy, and that's why it's more fun to sink your teeth into that kind of world than the real world? Like what is it?
Yeah, that's a huge part of it, is that conspiracy theories require a villain, and the villain is not us. If you are looking at the fires as a byproduct of a rapidly changing climate, and in particular in California, where we're having these wild swings between heat and drought and heavy rain and fire, the villain there becomes us. And it's our consumption, and it's our need for more cheap plastic stuff, and our need for more oil, and our need to build more homes and get more water for our golf courses. We have to start thinking about our choices. And so often, if you start, for me at least, if I was talking about the fires on social media and talking about, the climate is really changing, and you can really tell year to year, people start going, oh, well, now who's in a cult? And it's like, no, I'm watching it happen. And I'm thinking about what is my responsibility here? Do I and we as people belong in this part of the country? And if we're going to stay here, what do we do to protect ourselves? And what do we do to protect this beautiful part of the country? That's really hard for people to engage with because it is complicated, and it's not complicated in the way that conspiracy theories are, because conspiracy theories load themselves down with irrelevant details, with overly complicated plots and nonsense, but they avoid tackling issues that take a lot of thought and a lot of self-reflection. That's what makes conspiracism so appealing, is that you get to have the complexity, but you don't have any of the responsibility.
Right. Okay, so this has become a personal experience for you at this point. You mentioned that even our own president is espousing conspiracy theories that ultimately are doing what you're talking about, which is avoiding taking responsibility and for our own decisions about these complicated topics in order to sort of lay the blame on some obscure faceless cabal enemy. I mean, or the Democrats or whatever.
Right.
But like, even I think what's interesting is it's not just, the right that is being conspiracy theory about any of these things. You're also seeing it coming from Blue Anon.
Sure.
And so like, why have we always had this level of conspiracy mindedness and it was just like not noticeable before?
I think we've always been conspiracy minded. There's always been a certain type of person who just is not going to believe what they are told, whether it's by the media or by the government or experts or anybody else. We've always been fascinated by conspiracy theories as plots, as stories. What's really changed is the acceptability of conspiracy theories. This used to be stuff that you just didn't talk about with other people. And if you believed this stuff, you were isolated. You were just on your own. You had maybe a little community that would meet in some, dank bookstore, or you'd all meet up at the gun show and trade your anti-Clinton tapes and your Soldier of Fortune magazines. This is now so easy to find that there's no barrier to entry. You can log on to Twitter, Facebook, TikTok, anything, and within seconds, find a video or a post or a thread that validates some outsider belief that you've always had. And not only can you find it, you can share it. You can get together with other people who believe those things, whether they're scattered around the country or scattered around the world. And you can create these kind of self-sealing communities where no one's going to make fun of you. No one's going to call you stupid or crazy. You can be with the people who know what's going on. And everybody else is stupid and crazy because they don't believe you. They think you're wrong. And you can find these people who will go on this journey with you. You can create this material for yourself. If you do it well enough and you do it in a way that really hits people in the right way, you can make money off it. You can make a career off it. So what we've had is the easy access to material that used to be far too scandalous and bizarre for most people to ever see. Most people would never see a Holocaust denial video. Most people would have nothing to do with the UFO cult. Now it's just everywhere, and it's being spouted by some of the most popular and influential and wealthiest people in the Western world, and it's almost become inescapable.
Okay, well, that sounds pretty bad.
It's pretty bad. It's bad.
What do we do?
Yeah. And, what we do, I think, is try to protect ourselves and try to be the place where the disinformation and the conspiracism stops. So if you see something out there in the wild and it's pushing misinformation or it's pushing conspiracy theory, don't share it. Don't be the one who spreads it around going, well, this really made me think, or I'm just asking questions about this, whatever it is, whether it's conservative, whether it's progressive, whether it's economic, whether it's religious. If you see something that you feel like, well, no, that doesn't seem right, that just doesn't seem like it could be true, just don't share it. Just move on. Find something else. There's plenty of other really truly terrible things that are actually happening in our world. There's really no need to spend your time on the things that are not happening. If you see somebody in your life starting to go down that rabbit hole, they usually will be very vocal about it. There's a kind of public conversion that a lot of these people have, where suddenly they start just sharing all this stuff all the time and it becomes the only thing they're talking about. You could reach out to that person and say, hey, some of that stuff you're spreading, I don't think it's true, and I think it's kind of hateful, and maybe it's kind of racist, or maybe it's anti-Semitic, whatever it is. I think most people don't want to be thought of as hateful, crazy, anti-Semitic people. We're just people who are looking for answers in a world where things are very chaotic and very fast moving and don't seem like they make any sense. So you can privately reach out to that person. Don't start a flame war. Don't start trolling somebody you care about. Don't try to belittle them or insult them. That's only going to push them deeper down. Just say, hey, that's a really interesting question, but I don't think that's the answer to it. So it's really these very small, very private little battles that you have to have with both yourself and with the people in your life. And a lot of us just don't have the time or don't have the energy or just don't want to do that. And I think, unfortunately, as we see people that we care about going deeper down these spirals, we really do have to step in a gentle, affirming way. Now, if they've gone, sort of deep down into hardcore racist stuff or, Holocaust denial or really hardcore anti-vax stuff, you do not have to engage with that person. You can feel free to cut that person out of your life. But if you want to engage, I think doing it sort of delicately and humanely and non-judgmentally is a way that some people can be pulled out of this before it becomes too late.
Yeah, I'm just thinking, like, what are the red flags for when to recognize misinformation? Because, of course, every one of us is not informed about every single thing. And I definitely have had the experience of, conversion about certain kinds of things just because I wasn't aware of them before, and now I am. Like, I was not aware about criminal justice issues before I was put through my own interrogation experience, and now I've become more aware of them, and so I share more things about them. But, like, I'm very careful to make sure that what I'm talking about is, backed by evidence. But, like, what are some red flags that people should look for when they just see some kind of explanation coming their way that's like, hey, here's the new thing that you need to be aware of. It explains everything. Like, part of it is it hateful, right? Like, is it blaming the Jews?
Right. Is it blaming the Jews or people of color or immigrants?
Right.
Yeah.
So, okay. So if it's like specifically like this ethnic or cultural group is responsible for everything, that's a red flag.
That's a big, easily recognizable red flag to just walk away from that.
Okay.
Anything that you stumble across that just seems wrong, that seems like it's too good to be true, that just doesn't quite make sense to you. A lot of people start to leave conspiracy theory communities when they stumble on some piece of information that just cannot square with the things that they know to be true. We are pretty good at sniffing out lies and nonsense. And you just take that extra step back and ask yourself, does this feel true? Does this seem like it fits with the rest of the world as I understand it? Anything that comes from a really, really biased source or doesn't have a source, we see all the time, particularly on Twitter, somebody tweets breaking, blah, 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 and there's no source attached to it. And there's no reason why this couldn't be made up. Well, if there's no reason why it couldn't be made up, it's probably made up. And don't share it. Don't get worried about it. Just go on to the next thing.
Okay.
I think anything that provides just way too convenient of an explanation, particularly anything involving finances. We're going through this now with the fires. People are promising, 100% guaranteed loans. You won't have to do anything. Those are probably scams, and it plays on people's feeling like, well, I'm missing out. Somebody hurt me with this, and I want retribution. There are so many scams and frauds and hoaxes going around, certainly about all of these disasters. Seeing a lot of this stuff with FEMA. I've had a lot of interactions with FEMA over the last month. I can tell you that most of the people I've talked to with FEMA are terrific. They want to help. They want to answer the questions. Some of the people I've worked with haven't been so great. That's going to be true of any company, any agency, any person, any group of people, anywhere. It has nothing to do with, FEMA is, kicking down your door and confiscating your Starlink terminal, which is one of the things I saw with the hurricanes in the Carolinas in October. FEMA's only giving you $100 and they're making you sleep in a tent. Just taking somebody's word for it who is not there and doesn't know anything. Another one of those red flags of like, well, you don't actually know what you're talking about, and you're either making it up out of political reasons, or you just are repeating something somebody else told you. So try to find it from a legitimate, reputable source, and just try to think about it in a more objective way than, do I want this to be true?
Yeah, I think that's really a key point. Is there some deep, deep part of me that just really wants it to be true?
Yep, so much of it. Yep, so much of it is just, I want this to be true, therefore it's true.
Okay, well, where are you at now? And you're thinking about conspiracy theories because that's your whole thing. But in the meantime, you're also picking your life back up and putting it back together. Has any part of you been tempted by a conspiracy theory to make sense of your tragedy at any point?
Yeah, it is tempting because you want some reason why this happened. And I think one of the things we're trying to figure out is kind of, why did the fire start? Now, for me personally, that's not the most important question. I mean, the fire started for the reason that fires start. I mean, it was windy, it was dry, something sparked, and the wind, which normally would have been fairly placid, flung all these embers everywhere, started a bunch of other fires that the wind picked up all these embers and flung them everywhere. And it was so windy that, the firefighting planes couldn't fly, and they couldn't, there were other fires and there wasn't water pressure. There are a lot of reasons why this spread the way it did. And that's something I'm really interested in exploring more. But, the sort of like looking at a single person or company going, you did it, it's tempting, but that's not the question we're all asking ourselves right now as we sort of pick ourselves up. The question we're asking ourselves is, how did this happen and where do we go from here? So it's tempting in that you want a sort of grand unified theory for everything. And my background tells me there just isn't one.
Is it also tempting because you're hoping that by holding someone accountable, that you can somehow find help to rebuild what you've lost? Because there's we mentioned at the very start of this conversation that a lot of conspiracy theory comes from a sense of grievance and a sense of wanting someone to take accountability so that you can get compensation or something.
Sure.
So that something can be fixed. As you're thinking about putting your life back together and picking up the pieces, how are you just taking it as it is and you're going, well, sometimes life gives you things and sometimes it takes it away, and now we just gotta do what we can with what we have? Or is there a part of you that's sort of grasping at something outside of yourself for compensation for what you've lost?
Yeah, there's definitely a part of me that is interested in kind of fault and as you said, compensation. I mean, certainly there are legal issues at play here. The lawyers started coming around very quickly. We are getting involved in some of the litigation, but so much of this was this sort of confluence of factors that only could have come together on that one moment where you have these incredibly high winds, this incredibly dry vegetation, this 100-year-old community full of homes that are not up to 2025 fire code because they were built 100 years ago. So it's important to kind of keep those things in perspective, and there will hopefully be some sort of compensation. There will hopefully be some sort of responsibility for certain aspects of this, but trying to find one individual person or entity to blame every single aspect of it on, I think is a little bit of a fool's errand.
You can find Mike Rothschild's Jewish Space Lasers and The Storm is Upon Us anywhere you buy your books. You can follow him at RothschildMD on Bluesky.
In the meantime, get lost with us. Find us on Bluesky at amandaknox.com.
At wisecracker.bsky.social.
You can help support our work just by following or subscribing to Labyrinths wherever you listen to your podcasts. And sign up for our free newsletter at amandaknox.com to get the latest on all our work.
And under no circumstances should you play this episode backward. We promise there are no hidden messages. But you can and should subscribe to Labyrinths wherever you listen to your podcasts. Labyrinths is brought to you by the Illuminati and by Knox Robinson Productions. This episode was written and produced by us. Our managing producer is Andre Sapp, our assistant producer is Charlie Darnell, and our theme music is by Josh Budo Karp.